Welcome back to Love and Tears. Today I want to tell you a story, a memory that has been dormant for more than half a century. It is the story of a 16-year-old girl, lost between the desire to be loved and the invisible chains that bind her life. Tonight, as you listen, ask yourself, what would you do if love were not a choice, but a cage? Would you have the courage to say no? Or would you let your heart tremble in the dark, waiting for a door to open? Before we begin, I want to know where you are listening from. Leave your city name in the comments below so I can see how far this story has come. And if you're new to Love and Tears, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on stories that touch the heart. My name is Whisper Johnson, and at 81 years old, I carry a secret that has burned inside me for more than 6 decades. A secret so heavy that tonight I cannot keep it locked away any longer. When I was only 16, I became a wife. Not to one man, but to two. 2 men bound together in the same body. Conjoined twins. For 3 long years, I was their prisoner. For 3 long years, I endured things no young girl should ever endure. And every night, since I've asked myself the same question, how did I survive? Now, before you shake your head and think this old woman has lost her mind, sitting in her little house with her tea growing cold and her cat purring on the windowsill, I need you to listen. Every word I speak is true. Every memory is carved into me deeper than any scar on my skin. I know what you see when you look at me today, an old widow in Iron Kettle, Missouri. Quiet, polite, always bringing a casserole to church potlucks, always keeping the curtains drawn. You see a life that looks ordinary, maybe even a little lonely. But the truth is darker than anything you could imagine. And tonight, I will take you back to 1959, back to the moment I thought I had found salvation and instead walked straight into the longest nightmare of my life. So stay with me, because if you hear every word, if you follow me from the beginning to the end, you might just understand how a person can live through the impossible and still, somehow, call it living. The Gables had made an offer. Not just to the Reverend, not just to Mrs. Hendricks, but to fate itself. A generous sum of money enough to keep Mrs. Hendricks comfortable for years, if only she would hand me over. And their request was very specific. They wanted someone young, someone pliable, someone who wouldn't run screaming at the sight of what God had stitched together in one body. I still remember standing in that kitchen with flour on my hands, hearing them speak of me, as though I were nothing more than a calf being led to market. My future was weighed out like coins on a scale. Not a girl with hopes and dreams, just a problem to be solved, a transaction to be signed. That evening, after the Reverend left, Mrs. Hendricks called me into the parlor. The good chair, the one with blue flowers that I was never even allowed to touch, was waiting for me. She sat me down and began her speech with all the softness of a wolf dressed in lace. She told me the Gable twins were good Christian men, that they had been dealt a cruel hand by the Almighty, but still had land money and the means to provide for a wife in ways most men in Iron Kettle could not. She called it a marriage of convenience. She said convenience was better than charity. What she didn't say What lingered in the silence was that I had no choice. At 16, orphaned penniless, with no family to claim me, there were only two paths ahead. Take the Gables proposal or be cast out when I turned 18. I asked Mrs. Hendricks if she had ever seen them herself. Her face turned pale as milk. She whispered that some things were God's business, not ours. That a faithful woman must accept what the Lord provides without question. And right then, I knew. Whatever waited for me on Mockingbird Hill, it would not just change the course of my life, it would change me. The first time I saw Jacob and Elias Gable up close, I thought I was staring at both a miracle and a curse, wrapped together in one fragile frame of flesh. It was a cold Tuesday morning in November. Reverend Morrison drove me up the winding dirt road to Mockingbird Hill. The trees were bare, the wind slicing through my thin coat as if it were made of paper. My hands shook, not from the chill, but from that feeling you get standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing there's no turning back. Their house surprised me. A white clapboard mansion with green shutters, the kind of place that had seen better days, but still held the ghost of grandeur. The porch sagged, the paint peeled, yet it was finer than anything I had ever set foot in. When we knocked, there was a long pause. Shuffling footsteps, low voices, as if they were debating whether to open the door at all. And then it creaked wide. For the first time I saw them, and my breath caught in my throat. Two men joined at the hip, sharing the same legs, yet from the waist up, utterly distinct. On the left stood Jacob, dark hair curling slightly at the ends, brown eyes that missed nothing, smile lines etched into his face as though life had once been kinder to him. His presence was warm, almost disarming. Beside him, quieter, stood Elias. Lighter hair, always a little tousled. Blue eyes that pierced straight into my soul, as though he could see every thought before I spoke it. He hung back slightly, letting Jacob take the lead. The Reverend made his introductions. Jacob extended his hand, warm-calloused, the hand of a man who worked with purpose. Elias only nodded his silence, heavy, his gaze unreadable. Inside, the air smelled of old wood coffee and something softer lavender, maybe. Books lined every surface, stacked like towers, waiting to collapse. This was not the house of simple men. These were educated minds, cloistered from the world. Jacob poured coffee, moving with such grace it startled me. Elias moved in rhythm with him, as though their bodies knew each other's intent without words. It was like watching a strange dance, two lives lived in one frame, seamlessly intertwined. Jacob spoke easily, asking about my life, my skills, my reading. Elias said little, but his eyes studied me, as if memorizing each flicker of my expression. And then softly, he recited a few lines of poetry. His voice was low melodic, so unexpected, it made my heart stumble inside my chest. And that was the moment I realized this was not going to be simple. This was going to be the beginning of something that would consume me whole. At first, it felt like kindness. The Gable brothers listened to me in a way no one else ever had. They remembered the smallest details, how I took my coffee, how thunderstorms made me uneasy, how my mama used to hum hymns while she washed clothes for a girl who had spent years being overlooked. It was intoxicating to feel seen. Jacob's flowers in a jar. Elias's poems whispered like secrets meant for me alone. They built a world around me where I was the center, where I mattered. But the trap was set long before I realized I had stepped inside. The visits became routine. 3 times a week turned into every day. Every day turned into twice a day. Then weekends blurred into weeks, until suddenly my life in town was only a faint shadow I left behind. My belongings piece by piece migrated up that hill. A dress in their closet, my brush on their bureau, my books stacked on their table. And then came the quiet wedding. No white dress, no music, no family, just Reverend Morrison, Jacob Elias, and me in their parlor. A few simple vows, a prayer, a signature. And suddenly, I was a wife. Not to one man, to 2. For a while it still felt gentle, respectful. They treated me as if I were precious china, something to be protected. And I let myself believe I had been chosen, that maybe I wasn't unwanted after all. But one evening in December, the snow falling soft against the windows, the ground beneath my feet shifted. We'd finished supper pot roast, the way Jacob liked it, and was sitting in the parlor. Jacob reading from the newspaper. Elias bent over his crossword, a quiet domestic scene. I mentioned Mrs. Hendricks, wondered aloud if she had enough firewood for the storm. Said I ought to go check on her. That's when the silence fell. Heavy. Final. Jacob folded the newspaper slowly, deliberately. Elias set down his pencil, his blue eyes sharpened. "You're a married woman now?" Jacob said, his voice calm but absolute. "Your place is here," Elias added softly, "with your husband's." I opened my mouth to protest. She was old, she was alone. But Jacob raised his hand, silencing me with a smile that suddenly felt like a mask. They had already sent money, he explained, already arranged for someone else to tend to her. "We've taken care of everything," he said. "We always will." And then the sound that still haunts me, click, the soft, deliberate turn of a key. Jacob had locked the front door, sliding the key into his pocket, with casual ease, as if it were nothing at all. "For your safety," he said, his smile warm as ever. "The roads are icy. It's dangerous out there after dark." But I knew for the first time, I truly knew, that the door was not locked to keep danger out. It was locked to keep me in. And as winter settled over Mockingbird Hill, the silence pressed against the windows, seeped through the walls, and wrapped itself around me, tighter than any quilt. The garden project? At first, it felt like a gift. After months of stale air and locked windows, finally I was allowed to step outside. But even freedom had conditions. Jacob and Elias sat on the porch, like watchmen. I could dig in the soil, yes, but only for an hour each morning. I could choose vegetables, but only from seeds they had already bought. I could water the rows, but I could never touch the fence line. And God forbid I ever set foot on the path leading toward the road. And then I saw him, Tom Fletcher, the boy from town who delivered our groceries. He couldn't have been more than 19 sandy hair freckles scattered across his nose like stars. He moved with the confidence of someone who had never once doubted the ground beneath his feet. I was kneeling behind the bean poles when our eyes met. My heart thundered so loud, I thought Jacob and Elias could hear it from the porch. Tom raised his hand casually. Such a simple gesture. But to me it was sunlight, piercing through endless winter. I hesitated then, let my fingers twitch upward in the smallest of waves. Tom smiled anyway. And that smile, it shattered something in me. Or maybe it awakened something I thought was gone. That night, I crept to the front window when the house was quiet. His truck was long gone, but on the porch rail sat a small paper bag with our weekly receipt tucked under it. My hands trembled as I imagined walking down that path, picking up the bag and maybe walking a little further. But fear held me back. They always said the world was too dangerous for a woman like me, that I was fragile, in a delicate condition. A condition they never explained, but one I had no choice but to accept. Their protection was a cage, and I had handed them the key. Every Thursday, I began timing my garden work to match Tom's visits. Nothing obvious, just enough to remind myself the world outside still existed. A wave. A quick greeting across the yard. Small things that felt enormous to a starving soul. But on the third week, everything changed. Tom lingered. His eyes swept over me, not just friendly, but searching, concerned. He must have noticed how my body had grown thinner, how my skin was pale from too much time indoors, how the shadows beneath my eyes told truths my lips couldn't. And then, while Jacob dozed in his chair and Elias read on the porch, Tom's gaze shifted to the shed. He mouthed one word. Help. My blood froze. My hands shook so badly, I nearly dropped the trowel. I shook my head, terrified. Yet inside me, something stirred. A spark. Someone had noticed. Someone saw me. After that day, Thursdays became my lifeline. I watched closer. I noticed how Jacob always placed himself between me and the front door when Tom arrived. How Elias always pulled me away with some task during the delivery. Their protection was really control. And control, once you name it, can no longer disguise itself. Tom began leaving signs, so subtle they could be missed by anyone else. A penny on the porch rail, a wildflower tucked beneath the receipt, a small stone balanced perfectly on the garden gate. Tiny messages, I see you. I haven't forgotten you. I never dared reply. But I found myself brushing dirt from my blue dress before his visits, standing where he could see me more clearly, letting my eyes linger on his for a moment longer. Once when my husbands were arguing, I touched my throat and gave the smallest shake of my head. His eyes widened. He nodded. He understood. That night, lying between Jacob and Elias as they slept, I let my mind drift. I imagined stepping into Tom's truck, feeling the wind whip through the open windows, leaving Mockingbird Hill behind forever. I knew it was just a dream. But dreams are dangerous and necessary. For the first time in months, I had spoken without words. I had reached past the bars of my invisible cage, and though it was just a tiny act, a flicker of defiance, it felt like striking a match in a cave, small, fragile. But oh, it proved one thing: the fire inside me was not gone. The next Thursday, Tom brought more than groceries. Hidden beneath the cardboard divider of the egg carton was a folded piece of paper so small it looked like nothing more than scrap. I held it up to the window, squinting against the light, until the faint pencil marks revealed 4 words. Are you in danger? My knees nearly gave out. I stared at those words until they blurred, until my hands shook. Then, terrified someone might find them, I ripped the paper into pieces so small they scattered like lint inside my dresser drawer. But I couldn't destroy the echo. For days, those 4 words circled in my head like trapped birds. Are you in danger? At first I thought, no. Jacob and Elias never hit me. They never raised their voices in rage. They fed me, dressed me in fine clothes, told me I was beautiful, cherished, loved. But love with locks on the windows. Love that came with endless demands, with a schedule that devoured my body and soul. Tell me, dear listeners, is that truly love? Or is it something darker, wearing love's mask? For the first time since I'd climbed Mockingbird Hill, I had to answer a question someone else was asking instead of swallowing the answers Jacob and Elias spoon-fed me. And when I finally dared whisper the truth to myself, it felt like fever running through my veins. Yes, I was in danger. Not just danger to my body, but to my mind, my spirit, the memory of who I used to be before I became nothing more than something they shared. Summer pressed itself over the hill like a heavy wool blanket, suffocating and thick. The garden thrived tomatoes, swelling beans, climbing higher, but I barely noticed. All I cared for were Thursdays. 10 precious minutes when Tom's truck rattled up the drive and hope flickered back to life. The next message came wrapped around a cucumber. I almost missed it. A thin strip of paper scrawled with an address, 412 Maple Street, and beneath it, in the same faint pencil, safe place. Tell me when. I repeated the words until they became a prayer. 412 Maple Street, safe place. Tell me when. The address meant nothing to me. I had been gone from town too long to remember who lived where. But the promise of safety, that was a lifeline. The problem wasn't where. The problem was when. Every moment of my life was scheduled now. Morning duties, afternoon rest, evening obligations, nighttime demands. Jacob and Elias had built a clock out of my body and wound it to their rhythm. They never left me alone long enough to fetch the mail, let alone slip away to freedom. And yet, Tom's words forced me to name what I wanted. Not just distraction, not just town, not just conversation. I wanted freedom, the right to say no and be heard, to leave and return by my own choice, to breathe air that wasn't rationed out like medicine, but the heat made everything worse. Long afternoons when Jacob and Elias wanted me again and again, seeking comfort against the suffocating air. The fan stirred nothing but heavy warmth. The windows stayed locked tight. And I counted hours like a prisoner scratching marks into stone. Then one July afternoon, everything shifted. Jacob had fallen asleep in his chair, the heat dragging his body into slumber. Elias, too, was dozing lightly. Their satisfaction hung heavy in the room, and I moved about, clearing dishes in silence. That was when I noticed Jacob's pocket gaping open. Inside the faint metallic glint, Keys, not just the house keys. These were different, smaller, more numerous. My pulse pounded in my ears. 7 keys in total. 3 I recognized, front door, back door windows. But the others? What other logs existed in this house? What other freedoms had been stolen without me even realizing they were gone? I reached. 2 trembling fingers sliding inside his pocket, pulling out the ring with the caution of someone disarming a bomb. And then Elias stirred. His eyes opened. For one suspended heartbeat, we stared at each other. The keys lay in my hand, heavy as sin. Something flickered across his face. Not anger, not surprise, but sadness. A resigned sorrow, as if he had always known this moment would come. He looked from the keys to his brother, still asleep, then back to me. His blue eyes, once soft and kind, now sharp and searching. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper, but every word landed like a blow. He said he understood that a young woman might be curious, restless, that maybe I wanted to explore, but some doors, he said, were locked for good reason. And then he warned me about what happens to girls who go looking for trouble. Girls who believe they know better than the men who love them. And in that moment, with the keys still clutched in my hand, I realized something chilling. They had never needed chains or bars to keep me here. Their words were prison enough. Then he held out his hand, palm up, waiting for me to return what I had taken. I stood there, holding those keys, feeling the weight of them in my palm as if I were holding my own future. This was the moment, the choice between safety and freedom, between the known misery of my current life and the unknown risks of whatever lay beyond those locked doors. Everything that happened next depended on what I did in those few seconds. But Elias was still waiting, still watching me, with that patient expression that said he knew I would make the right choice. The safe choice. The choice that kept his world exactly as he needed it to be. And Jacob was starting to stir in his chair, his eyelids fluttering as he began to wake from his nap. I closed my fingers around the keys and felt the metal edges bite into my palm. For the first time in months, I was holding something that could change everything. The question was, did I have the courage to use it? That afternoon, my trembling hands returned the keys to Jacob's pocket, nearly waking him in the process. But something inside me had shifted. Something that could never be locked away again. For the first time since I had become Mrs. Gable, I had made a choice, even if it was to wait for a better moment, a safer opportunity. Elias never spoke of what happened, but his eyes lingered on me differently after that day. Not suspicion, but a quiet vigilance, as if I was something fragile that might break, or worse, something that might run away. He stayed closer to me, always finding excuses to share the same room to keep me within reach. The invisible leash grew shorter, tighter, yet I had learned something important. Their power depended on my cooperation, on my willingness to accept their version of reality. Once I stopped believing in it, their control began to crack like ice in spring. I started noticing things I had never paid attention to before: their breathing. When they slept, the creak of certain floorboards, which doors groaned when opened. I watched. I listened. I memorized, and I began to plan. The opportunity came in late August. Jacob had been sick for days, too weak for their usual routines. For the first time in months, I had an afternoon alone. The silence felt like a miracle, like breathing after being held underwater. Then I heard it, Tom Fletcher's truck, climbing the hill, arriving a day early because of some delivery mix-up. My pulse roared in my ears. Jacob and Elias were dozing, the sound of Jacob's congested breathing, covering any noise I made. My hands shook as I tore a scrap of paper from a recipe book and wrote 4 words small enough to hide inside my palm. Help me get out. I folded it tiny like a secret prayer and slipped outside. Tom's eyes widened when he saw me approach. I kept my voice casual, talking about vegetables and groceries. But when I pressed the payment envelope into his hand, the folded paper was hidden between the bills. For a moment, our eyes locked. Understanding passed between us, his grip, firm, his nod, almost invisible. Then it was over. I was back inside the kitchen, washing vegetables, my heart pounding my face, calm. When Jacob and Elias awoke, I was humming softly, pretending contentment. They believed it. They smiled, pleased with what they thought was obedience. But inside, I was counting days, clinging to the hope hidden inside that tiny note. That night, lying between them in the darkness, I whispered a prayer. Not the grateful prayers they taught me to say, but desperate ones, the kind that rise from the rawest place in your soul. I prayed for courage. I prayed for deliverance. And for the first time in nearly a year, I prayed that I might live long enough to feel freedom again. The next Thursday never came. Daniel's truck didn't appear in the driveway, and by afternoon, William and Edward were both restless in ways I had never seen before. They paced the windows, checked the calendar again and again, whispering theories to one another. William muttered that maybe Daniel was sick or his truck had broken down. Edward wondered if there had been an accident on the mountain road, but deep down I knew better. My folded scrap of paper had reached its destination. Somewhere in town, questions were being asked, questions William and Edward didn't want anyone asking. Friday passed, with no sign of the truck. Saturday stretched on, endlessly filled with a silence so heavy it pressed against my chest. They whispered more now, their voices urgent, their words clipped and dangerous. I didn't need to hear every sentence to know what they were planning. Because the thing they were planning wasn't a thing at all. It was me. By Sunday morning, William announced we wouldn't be going to church. His excuse was the weather, though the sky outside was clear as glass. We'll worship at home, he said, the way God intended. But I heard the truth inside his words. We weren't leaving the house. We weren't to be seen. No one would look at me and wonder why I seemed thinner, paler, quieter. That afternoon it struck me like a blow my message hadn't just been read. It had set something in motion, something bigger than I could control. Daniel hadn't tried to rescue me alone. He had gone to others, to people with authority, people who would not be charmed or silenced. And William and Edward knew it. Their careful manipulation dissolved overnight, replaced by something harsher, rawer. William checked every lock twice, overpressed his hand against the windows, counted the keys like a miser. Edward moved supplies, hiding food in corners of the house, preparing as though for a siege. They explained it all to me, slowly, as if I were a child who couldn't possibly understand. They said the people in town didn't know our love, our family, our truth. They would try to poison me with lies, make me doubt what I had dragged me away from the only men who had ever truly cared for me. But beneath the honeyed words, I heard the threat. They would not let me go. Ever. Monday morning, the sound came, the one I had both prayed for and dreaded. Engines on the hill. Not one, but several. Not just Daniel's truck. Stronger engines, heavier wheels. The sound of authority climbing the mountain. I was in the kitchen when I heard it. The plate slipped from my hand and shattered against the floor. My heart beat in its fragments. William appeared in the doorway instantly. His face was calm, but his eyes were wild. Whatever happens, he told me, remember this, you belong here. You are ours. The world outside will never understand. Then came the slamming of car doors. The thud of boots against the porch. Voices, official commanding, shouting about warrants, investigations, welfare checks. Edward caught my hand. His blue eyes, once so gentle, brimmed with something like farewell. He whispered, "Don't listen to them. Real love looks different. Real love never lets go." The pounding rattled the walls. A voice rang out steady and unshakable, saying they had legal authority to enter. William reached for his keys, but instead of opening the door, he checked every lock again, sealing us inside like a tomb. We stood there, the three of us, in the narrow hallway that had become my prison, listening as salvation and destruction pressed against the door. Tears ran down my face, but I couldn't even name them relief or terror or both tangled together. Because even as I prayed to be saved, I feared what that freedom might cost me. And then through the walls, I heard him. Daniel's voice. Not alone, stronger now, backed by someone with power in every word. A sheriff and a woman. A woman who spoke with certainty, with knowledge, with something like justice in her tone. The world outside had come for me. And that was when Edward did something I never imagined. He looked at his brother, then at me. His voice was barely a whisper, trembling yet clear. "Give her the keys." For the first time in years, the locks that bound me felt like they might finally break. He reminded Elias that I belonged to both of them, that I had made vows before God and the state that no one had the right to break up a legal marriage just because they didn't approve of it. The argument that followed was unlike anything I'd ever witnessed between them. For 3 years, Jacob and Elias had moved as if they were parts of one machine, anticipating each other's needs, finishing each other's sentences, sharing thoughts and desires with an intimacy that had shut the rest of the world out. But now, with freedom pounding on the door, they were no longer one. They were two men, two hearts, two minds, two very different visions of love colliding at last. Outside, Sheriff Franklin's voice grew sharp, losing its patience. I could hear others too, Tom Fletcher, Martha Fletcher, and the steady murmur of men who knew exactly how to handle barricades and broken promises. Elias reached for me then. His hands were trembling, but gentle, His blue eyes filled not with defiance, but with something that looked dangerously close to surrender. He told me he was sorry that he had never meant for it to go this far, that somewhere along the way they'd stopped protecting me and had begun protecting only themselves from the fear of losing me. Jacob spat his brother's name like a curse, clutching his keys, as if metal and locks could keep the truth out. But Elias lifted his hand toward me, paying open a fragile bridge between captivity and freedom. And in that moment, after years of believing I had no choice, I realized I did. I took Elias's hand. Something inside my chest cracked open like a locked door finally giving way. My legs shook, but they carried me to the front door. My fingers fumbled with the lock, the mechanism stiff from years of control, until at last it turned. Sunlight split the hallway, flooding shadows that had held me prisoner. Sheriff Franklin stepped in, first tall, steady as eyes kind. Behind him came Tom Fletcher, nervous but determined, with Martha. Right behind him, her presence reminding me there were women who fought for women even when the world tried to quiet us. The sheriff asked if I was safe, if I needed a doctor, if I wished to leave. His questions were simple, but his last one silenced the whole room. "Ma'am, are you here because you want to be?" I turned. Jacob's face was hard burning with betrayal and rage. But Elias was weeping. His tears ran freely as he nodded, as if granting me the permission I should never have needed. "No," I whispered. And that single word shattered the walls, louder than any gunshot. Walking out and climbing into Tom Fletcher's truck was like being reborn at 19. The air beyond Mockingbird Hill was too bright, too wide, too terrifying, and it was mine. The legal battle dragged on for months. The lawyers said what Jacob and Elias had done wasn't technically kidnapping, since I had signed my own vows. But it wasn't legal marriage either. Missouri had no law for what they had made of me. I was what the court called in limbo. Not victim, not criminal, just a girl who had chosen wrong and endured too long. Martha helped me find work at the courthouse, where filing papers slowly taught me how to belong to the world again. Tom was patient. It took 2 years before I could let him hold my hand without flinching. 3 before I said yes, when he asked me to marry him with just one groom and a future I helped shape. I'm 81 now. Tom's been gone 5 years, come December. We had 43 good years, ordinary precious years. We raised 2 children who never knew the full truth. But sometimes, in the quiet, I think of Jacob and Elias. I wonder if they found another town, another girl. I hope they learned. I fear they didn't. Surviving the impossible changes you. Every choice after that felt like a gift. Every sunrise, a miracle. I learned that love without freedom isn't love. That wanting isn't the same as valuing, that safety never comes with locked doors. If my story has found its way to you tonight, I hope it reminds you it is never too late to choose yourself, to say no, to walk into the light even trembling. Your voice matters, your choices matter. Your life is yours alone. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, let my voice reach them too. Because sometimes the most important truths are spoken by strangers who understand what survival really means. Tell me in the comments, what city are you listening from? And maybe you have a story of your own that needs telling.